Hello, welcome to video number 17 in our series, Microsoft Certified Professional Developer 4.0 with ASP.NET and C Sharp. The content exam focus is 70-515. Content is owned and created by Ravi Nanganuri, Microsoft MVP, .NET So video number 17, we're going to explore services. So working with services, creating, consuming services is an exam fundamental for 70-515. Now, services provide a way to move data between disparate systems. So very simply put, we have data or business logic we want to expose. We can expose that via services. The systems can be on different vendor platforms. It's not just a Microsoft thing. It becomes a very nice way for us to basically expose data. A lot of companies moving to this service-oriented architecture approach. Now, XML is often the ideal way to represent the data. It's certainly not the only way to compartmentalize the data. We looked at JSON, which is another way in a previous video. There's several ways to represent data. XML, what we talked about in this video, a very common way, especially via web services, to represent the data. Now, web services uses SOAP over HTTP, so we'll talk about ASP.NET Web Services in this video. And SOAP over HTTP provides nice benefits like traveling over firewalls very easily, this type of thing. Now you can leverage web services for several different reasons, but you want to expose data or business logic typically either inside your organization, so let's say across systems, maybe legacy systems and newer systems, they need to move messages or data. Maybe externally to partner companies. An example might be you want to send your inventory list down to your customers, for the various partner companies, or maybe externally to the public. So if you've got some service, you could certainly expose it over the internet. Maybe you want to broadcast details about, weather, statistics from like ESPN. There's all kinds of different examples of public web services. And web services support features such as caching, asynchronous operations. As we'll see as we use the service reference here, that you get some of this plumbing basically just handled for you out of the box. And we'll make mention of WCF. We're going to cover WCF in the next video actually. But Windows Communication Foundation is Microsoft's next generation communication messaging platform. Web services are but one mechanism via WCF you can communicate. That's a much deeper, broad topic. WCF provides a lot of rich benefits, different types of ways to host the services, etc. We'll get into that in the next video. I'm going to go ahead and start a new project here kind of from scratch to kind of show you this kind of from the alpha to omega, so to speak. I'll just create a new web application. And so we're just starting off. This could also be a website, but let's say that we're just creating a web application. We're going to have some type of web service we want to expose. So again, we have some data that we want to move. Now this could be data from a SQL Server database. This could be business logic. This could be XML data that we are going to pull. But the idea is we're going to expose this via a web method. And you see here that I just got this new web application. I'm just going to right click and do an add new item. One of the items you have down here is the web service. And the difference is you'll see here on the web service is this file extension is .asmx. So if you've been doing .NET development before, you're probably very familiar with web services already. We're going to simply create a ASMX web service. This is an exam fundamental. You need to know how to create and consume these. So notice I've got a web application. Now this is a standard web application, just happens to have an ASMX web service involved in it. More likely we could have an application that that's all it had was ASMX services involved in it, but they can live right alongside your other stuff in web apps. Notice some of the plumbing here that's already taken care of it. Much of it's driven by attributes here. So you can see here that we're using system.webservices at the top. With this web service namespace, which we'll actually get back to in a moment and change up here at the top, all driven by attributes up here. Notice that we can enable this for AJAX calls by uncommenting some of that out. And then down here, this is kind of the nuts and bolts. We have a web method. So this web method decoration here indicates that this method is going to be exposed as a service. And we'll just do something a little different. Return .NET videos.NET. Now this could certainly be data we're getting from a database again or somewhere else. Some fancy logic may be happening here. It could be a data set we're exposing. Doesn't just have to be a string. We'll use a simple string for our example. But that certainly could be more complicated than that. And often will be. If you just see that I have I'm going to right click and set that as start page. I can actually just run this service right here and test this locally. So if I'm responsible for doing the development on the web service, I might do this. And notice as it launches this different IE browser. It basically is making a SOAP over HTTP call at this point. We have some details around here about what the service is. You see I only have one method exposed at this point. As I added methods, I would see those show up at a bullet point list here. I click that and I can see the details of kind of what this method does, and the data type down here, which is string, what the method's going to do. So we have a very simple method, and again, this could be much more complicated than that. We might be passing more complicated structures like data sets that had tables of data from SQL Server. We might be passing parameters, this type of thing. But notice here that when I invoke it, I simply get back the expected response, which is hello.netvideos.net. Now, one of the things you're going to want to automatically change is this namespace up here. It gives you this temp namespace. You want to give this typically a URL where you're going to host your web service. It doesn't have to be. It should be a unique namespace. It certainly doesn't have to be a valid URL, but it doesn't want to be that temp URI either. Down here in the web method attribute, there'll be other ways to extend the functionality via that web method attribute. But at this point, I've just changed that URL. We're going to come back to that. I'm not going to compile this at this point. I'm actually going to add a new project, and we're going to create a consumer for a web service. We'll come back to that namespace. I'll show you why shortly. So when I'm going to create this consumer, it wouldn't have to be another web application. It certainly doesn't have to live in the same solution here, but we'll go do that for simplicity. Could be a Windows app here consuming the service, or other type of WPF application, etc. I'm going to go ahead and create another web application though, and I'm just going to put a blank web form on the screen here. I'll go ahead and fast forward a bit as I wire some of this up. I just want a button basically and a label so I can make a call to the service. So the idea is this might be living in a completely different environment, completely different company, completely different network, of course. We're going to travel over HTTP with SOAP and be able to communicate with the service this way. I'm going to right click and add a service reference. Notice I said service reference, which is going to give us a little more functionality here. I'll click the Discover button, and it's going to automatically find services for me via the WSDL. I could plug the URL in of a service I knew if I didn't have the ability just to discover it on my own network. But I could just basically highlight that at that point and give it a namespace down here. I'm going to call this Demo Service. And at this point, I'm just referencing, similar to the way I would reference other things, and you see that I've got some advanced operations. I could generate asynchronous operations for this service. Imagine long-running services. I can change the access modifiers here for them. So you've got some advanced options, but at the bare minimum, you can reference the service, click OK, and much of the plumbing, creating the proxy, all of that's going to be handled for me. Some web config entries, etc. So it's that easy. You simply right-click and reference the service, and now I can use this demo service almost as if it was just a DLL sitting there locally to me, the way I'd use other references if you're familiar with that already. If I double-click, it'll drop me over here to the object browser, which I can examine more details about what's going on. We'll come back into the service and look a little deeper here shortly. But the idea here is I've just created a service reference, not a Web 2.0 reference, but a newer service reference that came around in .NET 3.0. And at this point, I can just use this, though, just like a local reference. So if I look at the actual web config itself, and this is on the consumer side, where I reference the service, which again may just be some publicly thing halfway across the world, you notice you have this endpoint address here. That port there is just because I'm running a local Cassini server. That would be a real URL if you're looking at something that was public, like on the external internet. And you notice lots of different settings here from the binding that I'm getting, buffer size, timeouts, send timeouts, lots of different config settings from this system.service model, which again I get some of this by adding the service reference, not doing just a plain old ASP.NET 2.0 web service reference if you're familiar with that. I'm going to come into the button click of the consumer now, and I'm just going to reference or create an object of demo service called DS here, and we'll just create this. And this is going to give me access, as we'll see with IntelliSense, to the actual method. So I'm going to set the label text property for an easy demo, of course, and do a ds.helloworld. And that should return that hello.netvideos.net. Now, we actually have an issue we'll come back to in a moment, and we'll run into in a moment. But you notice here that I'm just creating an object. I'm just using my namespace there, just instantiating an object of that proxy class, and then I'm just invoking hello worlds. So very simple to use services. Not a lot, a lot of the plumbing is hidden from you. You can get into it if needed, but most of the time it's that easy. You're just simply adding references. Now I'll go ahead and run the consumer app. I'll have to click the home page here since we didn't set it as a start page. And I just have my button and label. Now when I click the call service button, however, we're going to run into an issue. It's going to say, hey, we do not recognize the value of this temp URI.helloworld. Remember I changed that to .NET videos.net. I did not recompile that at that point and update the service, so I wanted to show how you could update that. So when you change your namespaces, or someone changes namespaces, or changes something, wouldn't even have to be a namespace, that may break you at the service side, you can simply come in here, and I'm going to click Show All Files, by the way, in Solution Explorer. So you can see here there's several files that gets created, this service info file. If I drill down into this reference.cs, I can kind of see what's going on. I'm still referencing that tempuri.org, which is the wrong URL. Now, it could be that they changed the API on me and broke me some other way. But to get an update to this reference, I want to show you how easy it is. You notice the .NET videos.net's the actual namespace there. Recompiling the whole solution doesn't do it. You need to, when you want to update your service references, what you need to do is come into your consumers that are using the services and simply right-click the service itself and do an update service reference. And this will open a dialog. It'll go out, re-download the information. And if actually you drilled into the nuts and bolts, you would see down in that reference.cs file, or that class file, you actually see, there it is, the .NET videos.net got updated. So anytime something gets changed out in the service that may break you, periodically you just want to just update your service reference. I go ahead and click Homepage again. I can call the service, and then voila, we have the hello.NET videos.net here working appropriately. So updating service references are very easy. Coming into these files is not typically something you're going to be doing like on a manual basis, but you can certainly use those to troubleshoot, etc. You can also do a configure service reference. We'll bring you back into that advanced dialog. Again, if I want to generate asynchronous operations, at the very bottom of this dialog, you would have noticed you could also use a web ASP.NET 2.0 service like you were using in previous versions of .NET, etc. So the next video, we'll get into WCF services and go from there.